Hello, my name's Mrs. Tyler, and today we're drawing a knowledge organiser for some biology revision, and we're looking at the eye and the brain. So this is just triple GCSE content, so if you're doing dual award or combined, then you don't need to do this bit. If you are doing triple, get ready, because we're going to make something that looks a bit like this. 4 sections. We're going to be drawing lots of circles, because we're doing the eye. Get ready, take your time. Ask your teacher to pause if you need to. Let's get started. Right then. So, this is triple GCSE. And we're going to do on this one, the brain and the eye. Go around the edge to make it stand out. And as usual, we're going to divide our page so we know how to set it out and to divide it down the middle. Yet again, I've not done my title in the middle. Into quarters. And this top left-hand side, we're going to be doing about the brain. Then we're going to be doing about the structure of the eye. Then we're going to be doing about focusing. And lastly, we're going to be doing about correcting vision. Let's start off with the brain then, and we're going to draw the top of the spinal cord first. So remember, the brain attaches directly to the neurons that run up the middle of your backbone. And then there's a sort of bulge in it at the top. At the back of the brain, there's a very smaller, lumpy body called the cerebellum. And then we've got the much larger cerebral cortex. Dangling down from in the middle of there is a little gland called the pituitary that we talk about when we do about the endocrine system in another video. All right, so let's get this labelled. This was the spinal cord. And at the top of the spinal cord, called the brainstem, and the area of the brainstem you need to know about at GCSE is called the medulla. So the slight bulge at the top of the brainstem, the medulla is located in this part here. And the medulla is in charge of unconscious activity. Things like heart rate and breathing are coordinated here, right at the top of the spinal cord. At the back of the base of the brain then, we've got this small body called the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is to do with muscle coordination. The largest part of the brain then, certainly in humans, is called the cerebral cortex. And the cerebral cortex is in charge of conscious thought. So things like memory, language are processed here. Two other bits that I'm going to mention now while we're doing the brain are a section directly above this dangly bit here called the hypothalamus. And we mention the hypothalamus when we're talking about homeostasis. It's this area of the brain that connects to a hormone releasing area, the pituitary. So the hypothalamus is to do with homeostasis, so things like body temperature. It's regulated here. And underneath that are two lobes, actually. A little gland called the pituitary. And this secretes hormones, again to do with homeostasis. So we'll meet that in my next knowledge organiser on the endocrine system. So that's the brain then. The cerebellum in charge of muscle coordination, cerebral cortex in charge of memory, language, sight is processed somewhere near the front here. And then we've got the brain stem with the medulla in charge of heart rate and breathing. And then we've got these two structures here, the hypothalamus and the pituitary, which we'll meet later on. Studying the brain is really difficult. One of the main ways which we learned which part of the brain does what was by studying people with specific brain injuries. So if somebody's got damage to a particular part of the brain and they lose the ability to do something, then you can guess that that part of the brain coordinates that function. We've also studied it by putting electrodes directly into the brain and stimulating electrically that part of the brain and seeing the response. So electrodes into the brain to stimulate specific areas. And more recently, we've been able to use MRI scans, so magnetic resonance imaging. So we can use MRI scans, ask people to do a certain function, and then see which part of the brain is active. So these are all ways of studying. On to the eye then. So we're going to draw, no surprise, a big circle here. Take your time. I'm going to do it slightly over to the left because I'm going to draw some smaller images here. So I do one half there. I'm going to leave a small gap because the optic nerve has got to come out. And I'm going to leave a gap at the front and do the other half there. At the front then, there's a slight bulge. And the layer over that bulge is clear. It's called the cornea. And then when it goes around the edge of the eye, it turns white and it's called the sclera. So we're going to draw a thin layer slowly and carefully all the way around the edge. So this clear window at the front is the cornea. And when it gets to the edge, it turns white. It's called the sclera. Behind the cornea then, we've got a circular muscle, but if we cut it in half, there'd be a hole in the middle of it. It's actually a donut shape, and that is the iris. And that has two sets of muscles that can make the hole in the middle wider or narrower. And the hole in the middle is the pupil. So the reason the pupil, when you look at your eye, is a black dot is because literally it's a hole straight through to the back of your eye. The back of your eye is black. Behind that then, we've got a clear sac that can change shape, called the lens. And it's held in place by sets of fine filaments called suspensory ligaments. And they in turn are attached to another circular muscle called the ciliary muscle or ciliary body. So these are the suspensory ligaments. This is the ciliary muscle. Round the back of the eye then is an inner layer of light-sensitive cells called the retina. It goes everywhere except where the optic nerve comes out, where there is a blind spot. I'm just going to shade that in. So now we're going to have a think about how this part of the eye works. The iris changes to change the size of the pupil. We're going to do that here. And then we're going to be thinking about how the lens changes to allow you to focus. And we're going to be doing that down here. Whatever happens, light enters through the front of the eye and is focused into a fine point on the retina at the back. And that makes an electrical signal that goes down the optic nerve to the brain. The optic nerve is attached to a receptor. The retina contains receptors, and so it is a sensory neuron. Okay, so we're just going to have a little think then about this front part of the eye here and how the iris changes size. We call it the iris reflex. I'm going to draw two eyes from the front this time. There's one. There's two. And this first one is going to be in bright light. It's going to be bright sunshine. Let's draw the iris. As we see it from the front, the iris is the coloured circle of muscle at the front, and the pupil is the hole in the middle. And if the light is bright, your pupil should be small. The reason your pupil should be small is to stop too much light getting into your eye and damaging these receptors on your retina. Okay, so it makes it small to protect it. It's a reflex. Okay, it's a protective automatic action. In order to make the pupil small then, you've got a set of circular muscles here that squeeze in and contract. So they squeeze in, making the pupil small. You've also got a second set of muscles called radial muscles, and they relax, they stretch. So they stretch and make the iris wider. So the circular muscle contracts, making the pupil small. And the radial muscles, they're the ones that come out like the spokes of a wheel, relax.
making the iris wide. So if we go into low light intensity, draw our iris again. The overall size of the iris doesn't change shape, it's just the pupil in the middle. If there's not much light, then you want as much light as possible to get in to your eye so that you can activate the receptors in the retina and send a message to the optic nerve so you can see. So this time, the pupil wants to be big. So this time, the circular muscles relax. We go back that way. And the radial muscles contract. So this time, the circular relaxes. So making the pupil bigger. And the radial muscles contract, pulling the iris back, making it shorter. Or narrower. Okay, on to some tricky stuff then. How we focus, how we get this light to form a straight beam and come to a point on the retina. We can do it because our lens can change shape. And we call this changing shape of the lens accommodation. And you need to know that word. Accommodation, the lens changing shape. I also just want to point out that we've drawn the eye sideways on here. So now we're going to be looking at the lens and these suspensory ligaments and these ciliary muscles. And drawn sideways on, it looks like it's long and thin. But if we looked at it from the front, so as if we were looking from the front of the eye, we'd see it's another set of circular muscles. It looks very much like the pupil, but it's not the pupil. The iris sits in the middle. Sorry, the lens sits in the middle. And then coming off all the way around the lens are fine strands. So the suspensory ligaments here come off all the way around the edge. And the ciliary muscle is a donut-shaped muscle all the way around the edge of that. These are called suspensory ligaments. So let's just think about this for a minute. When the ciliary muscle contracts then, it's going to squeeze in. And that's going to mean that the suspensory ligaments aren't pulled as tight. They go soggy or floppy because the ciliary muscle's closer, which means the lens will get fatter. It will flop down fatter. When the ciliary muscle relaxes, it will widen. And as it widens, it's going to pull on these suspensory ligaments. They're going to become tight, and it's going to pull the lens thinner. So accommodation, focusing, is all to do with this ciliary muscle, which is actually a donut-shaped muscle, relaxing and contracting and pulling the lens fatter or thinner. But annoyingly, we draw it side on so we can see the light rays. So we're going to draw two eyeballs, a bit smaller this time. There's my first one. And here's my second one. This first one, we're going to be looking at things that are nearby or close. For example, if you saw a ladybird, pick it up, put it close to your eye so you can see it. When we're looking at something close, the light rays are bouncing off and they're scattering in all directions. But the ones that get in our eye are still spreading out, okay? They're diverging. So we need our lens to be nice and fat so that those light rays that are going out can be bent or refracted back in again. Okay, so because the light rays from nearby things are going outwards, we need a nice fat lens to refract or bend the light back in again. So the lens needs to be fat. And remember what I said about the ciliary muscles. If the lens is fat, then it doesn't want to be pulled thin. The suspensory ligaments need to be slack, which means the circle needs to be smaller, the ciliary muscle, so it needs to be contracted. So when we're looking at near things, the ciliary muscle is contracted. Which means the suspensory ligaments become slack or loose. Looser. And that means that the light is bent more or refracted more. So if the lens is fat, the suspensory ligaments are loose, drawing them wobbly, and the ciliary muscle is contracted, it's closer to. So you can consider then, if we're looking far away, let's pretend we're looking at a tree on a hill in the distance. That's far away. Again, the light is scattering. This time, the light that's coming into the eye, because it's further away, isn't going to be coming at such a steep angle. It's going to be coming at a more gentle angle. Which means it needs to be bent less or refracted less, which means the lens needs to be thinner. So we need a thin lens. And just like for the fat lens, the suspensory ligaments need to be loose, for a thin lens, those suspensory ligaments need to be pulling tight. So the ciliary muscle needs to be relaxed because it needs to be big. So the lens becomes thinner, and so the light is refracted less. Counterintuitive that, because the ciliary muscle is round. Okay, you might need to stop and have a little think about that for a minute. Last one then, we're going to think now about correcting vision. And we're going to think about being long-sighted and short-sighted. So again, we need to draw two eyeballs. We're going to draw them slightly shorter. I'm going to draw mine here. A bit smaller, sorry, not shorter. So there's one eyeball, and we're going to draw another one. There. All right, so we're going to think first about when someone is long-sighted. If someone is long-sighted, it means they can see things far away, but not close to. So when things are near, let's go back to our ladybird example. The lens should be getting fat. We know that when we see things nearby, the lens should be fat. But if someone's long-sighted, the lens stays too thin. And so it doesn't bend the light enough. So instead, we need to put a corrective lens. The person needs to wear glasses. And that lens needs to be convex. And what that's going to do is refract some of that light for us back into the eye. So it focuses there. So it's going to bend it back. Okay, it's going to refract it more. So when you're long-sighted, your lens is too thin or not fat enough. So it needs to be corrected by a convex lens. And that refracts the light more. And it means that it focuses the beams of light to a fine point on the retina. Convex lenses can also correct if your eyeball is the wrong shape. Okay, let's have a look then when you are short-sighted. So when you're short-sighted, it means you can see things near but not far away. Or distant. And let's think about this over here. We know that when we're looking far away, the lens needs to be thin. So if you're short-sighted, your lens isn't thin, your lens is too fat. Or not thin enough. So that means that the light is refracted too much because the lens is too fat. So we need it to refract less. So this time we correct it with a concave lens. So here we've got our tree again on our hill. And this time the light is coming in too narrow and we need to bend it outwards so it can go back in again. Okay, so this one converges the light and this one diverges the light. It spreads it out. Which diverges the light. So it can focus once again on a single point on the retina. It's worth saying that if you don't put these lenses in and the lens is too fat, so if you don't put a concave lens in front and the lens is too fat, then it would focus into the middle of the eye there, which would be wrong. And equally, if this one didn't have the convex lens, it would focus behind the eye, which would also be wrong. So vision can be corrected by putting lenses in front. A convex lens means that if you've got the lens in your eye is too thin, refracts the light more so you can see things near to. And a concave lens is when your lens is too fat and it refracts the light more divergently, spreading it out so that you can focus. So this is using glasses. Another way you can do it, and you might be asked to evaluate that, is also by using contact lenses. They're good for sports. You can have laser eye surgery, which actually changes the way the light bends, refracts by taking bits off your cornea. So it's your cornea that's affected. There is a risk of complications with that. But you can also have replacement lenses. Which is when a new plastic lens is put inside your eye, but you've got to get in your eye, so that's surgery. So there's a risk of infection. That's it for today. A lot to learn. Keep an eye out in the link below for my testing your knowledge of the eye. And I'll see you next time.